Osric Galloway had long ago traded star-specked windscreens for flower boxes and a slow view of Jupiter's dawn. When he'd finally hung up the worn captain's jacket of the cargo hauler Scarlet Meridian, he'd sworn he was finished with every sort of engine louder than a gardening drone. Yet 5 quiet years after retirement, he felt the old pulse again, the vibration of distant guns reverberating through Prosperity Station's bulkheads, rattling cups in the cafe where he nursed his afternoon tea. Outside, like black knots in the silver cloth of space, 12 blockade cruisers of the Dominion of Unified Corporate Holdings encircled Prosperity. They'd arrived a month earlier, cutting supply routes and severing comm channels, bent on forcing the station's council to sign an unduly generous mineral concession. The council refused, and so the Dominion tightened the noose, waiting for oxygen scrubbers to clog and for pantries to empty. Prosperity's streets had grown quieter each day. A line wove through the hydroponic gardens for rationed spinach. Parents kept children indoors in case the Dominion's patrol fighters decided to turn intimidation into target practice. People had started looking over their shoulders whenever a heavy footstep echoed in a corridor, wondering if the docking clamps would snap next and life support would bleed out into vacuum. Osric spent most evenings in Dock Ring C, not because he had business there, but because that was where the tugboats lived. Little vessels, half tug, half tow truck, part stubborn mule, were useful on a station whose entire economy centered on moving rocks and containers. Even during blockade, they still bustled in and out, shuffling empty cargo pods and repositioning shield panels. They had tiny engines, oversized directional thrusters, and pilots who thought inertia was an overrated superstition. One particular evening, while he watched a tug named Ballyhoo twirl through a tight docking cycle, a slim hand tapped his shoulder. "You're Captain Galloway, aren't you? The freight legend who once ran a relief run through a pirate gauntlet at Saturn." Osric turned and regarded the speaker. She wore station maintenance overalls smudged with graphite lubricant. Her eyes were bright with the kind of reckless courage that made veteran captains uneasy. "I was," he allowed, "and unless I've forgotten my own station directory, you're Mara Chen, foreman of Tug Bay 5. Mara grinned, baring teeth like a daring card player. "Guilty. I need to buy you coffee." "Actually," she glanced at a flickering ceiling light, "something stronger." "Rumworks?" Osric narrowed his eyes, the old instinct rising inside him. "What are you planning, Miss Chen?" "Nothing yet. But it's about to be something. Meet me at Anchor Point Bar, top of Ring." He considered refusing, going back to his pots of dwarf roses. Instead, he felt himself grumble assent. Maybe he needed to know what she had in mind, so he could tell her why it wouldn't work, whatever it was. At Anchor Point, the rum tasted like melted caramel laced with rocket fuel. Mara slid a data slab across the table. On the screen spun a 3-dimensional diagram of a formation of ships. 10 tugboats arranged nose to stern, rotating around a common axis like cogs on an invisible screw. "It's called the drill," she said. "On minor folklore streams, there's talk of grimy tug crews doing it once to punch through a plasma storm near Ceres. Nobody's verified it. Engines aren't supposed to like that kind of spin. But look." She tapped parameters, centrifugal stabilizers, vectoring thrusters angled in symphony. The virtual tug column whirled faster, the nose cones glowing red with friction. Osric watched, silent. He understood physics well enough. The idea was insane, but not impossible. "The Dominion's blockade is thickest around the South Pole," Mara continued. "Their cruisers sit in a grid overlapping fields. Fighters roam inside. If Prosperity launches anything big, they'll shred it. But what if we launch something so small they dismiss it? Something that ramps speed past their intercept threshold before they notice?" "You want aim a stack of maintenance tugs at capital ships," Osric said dryly. "You'll be vaporized." They argued for an hour. Mara had answers for most objections. Reinforced bow plates scavenged from ore haulers, synchronized navigation code to prevent drift, magnetic grapples extended like drilling teeth so that if they reached a cruiser's belly, the spin would act as an auger. She lacked only two things: a strategist who'd danced around warships before, and a captain the ragtag crews would trust enough to follow. "I've read your logs, Captain," she said quietly. When the bar's lights dimmed for station night cycle, "You once threaded a convoy past 3 Jovian privateer clans. You anticipate fire arcs like you can smell plasma. Give us that, and I'll give you a breach in the blockade. Enough for freighters to flee or relief ships to dock." Osric stared into the dark rum in his glass. He remembered nights on the Meridian's bridge when he'd promised himself he was done gambling lives. Retirement had been his pledge to Lily, his late wife, whose ghost still sat across every table he dined at alone. She would have told him to rest. But she also would have reminded him that prosperity, the virtue, meant more than the name on the station's hull. He exhaled. "First, we need more than 10 tugs. We'll want mass. And we need countermeasures, decoys, engineering overhaul." He looked up. "If we do it at all, we do it properly." Mara's grin returned, chased by relief. "Aye, Captain." The next 2 weeks ran on adrenaline and recycled coffee. Osric assembled the old guard friends from his freight days who'd chosen quiet lives on the station. There was Juno Batia, ex-Marine officer turned librarian, Ruair Lee Doyle, who once calibrated railguns for the Belt Militia but now tuned orchestra holograms, and Dr. Sadiq al-Mashadani, who'd patched up half the Belt's smugglers before retreating to teaching first aid at the community college. Each said yes in under a minute. Tug crews came just as easily. Prosperity's tug pilots were used to improvisation and risk. Blockade boredom had sharpened their appetite for mischief. They volunteered in droves, some hiding fear behind jokes, others shoving IOU chips in one another's faces in case things went sideways. Logistics became Osric's obsession. He turned Dock Ring C into a clandestine shipyard. Under tarps and falsified maintenance memos, teams stripped surplus cargo pods, welding sections to tug noses like battering rams. They scavenged ablative armor from decommissioned shuttles, bolting plates over fuel tanks. Ruarii rewired tug reactors to redirect extra power to directional thrusters. Juno reprogrammed navigation arrays, writing an algorithm named Spiral that would keep orientation flawless even when centrifugal forces threatened to disjoint limbs. Dr. Sadiq built restraints and G-suits from medical straps and old mining exoskeleton harnesses. He warned pilots that the drill's maximum rotation, 30 revolutions per minute, could burst blood vessels without proper counterpressure. No one backed out. Meanwhile, Osric studied Dominion patrol patterns. He watched hours of sensor feeds, cruisers lounging like fat sharks, fighters swooping in lazy loops. He noted handoff gaps when 2 destroyers switched perimeter watch and their overlapping scanning cones parted by a fraction. There, between 3:24 and 3:25 station time, existed a corridor no wider than 200 meters. If the drill hit that needle's eye, it could emerge smack under the aft quarter of the nearest cruiser before alarms fully triggered. On the 15th night, the council summoned Osric. They'd heard rumors. Councillor Menendez, gray-hailed and proper, informed him the station would not sanction reckless assaults. If his civilian stunt provoked bombardment, Prosperity could lose everything. Osric listened politely, then placed his old captain's badge on the table. "Sir, Prosperity's already dying. We're down to 45 days of food, 22 of oxygen scrub pads. When Dominion's terms arrive, you'll sign because families are suffocating. This plan is risk, yes, but surrender is certainty, and I swear on every freight manifest I ever signed that we can punch a hole without bringing the fleet's wrath on civilians." Menendez tapped the badge, thinking. Finally, he nodded. "Do it. Quietly. If it works, you're a hero. If it fails, I will claim you acted without authority." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Osric said. Launch day dawned behind Jupiter's swirling storms, hidden from blockading sensors by Prosperity's bulk. 26 tugs floated in Dock Ring C, connected nose to stern by reinforced couplers. Their hulls were painted matte black, with scatter nanocoat to fuzz signature. Each bore a nickname stenciled on its flank: Gremlin, Dust Bunny, Pickle, Stubborn Glory. Inside Ballyhoo, the Pointig Osurek strapped in next to Mara. She'd insisted on piloting Tip. "I started this mess. I'm first through," she argued. Across the improvised intra-ship line, voices cracked jokes, muttered prayers. The spiral program pinged green across consoles. Reelia's voice came over calm. "Spin up commencing. Engage coupler locks." Osric's stomach lurched as thrusters fired, initiating rotation. The 26 tugs began to whirl, slowly at first, then faster, each vessel's port thrusters burning while starboard thrusters retarded, establishing rotation without forward velocity. Restraints dug into shoulders. Dr. Sadek's harness bit like a friendly python. At 25 RPM, centrifugal force pinned everyone's cheeks sideways. Motto's voice sounded crushed. "Rotation nominal. Engaging forward thrust in 3, 2, 1. Main drives flared. The column translated, still spinning. Nose pointed toward Prosperity's south polar exit lock, a kilometer-long tunnel lined with mag-cessillators, originally meant for bulk cargo barges. The station opened the doors covertly, venting atmosphere in calculated pulses to mask sensor signatures. The drill entered the acceleration tunnel. External mags latched onto hull plates, flinging the tugs faster, 30 kilometers per second, 50, 90. They shot from the exit lock like a bullet of whirring metal, the joint roar of 26 engines flattened into a single keening howl by vacuum. Osric watched readouts. 92 seconds until intercept with blockade grid. He opened a channel to all vessels. His voice steady despite the vibration rattling his bones. "Spiral alignment check. Remember? You're frayed dogs with gyros in your bellies? Stick true. Think of home cooking waiting on the other side." One by one, green confirmations lit. At 40 seconds out, Dominion sensors finally pinged. Mara's console showed incoming queries, then bright red lock symbols. Cruiser, UCH inexorable, started powering main guns. Fighters scrambled, but they were perched inside launch racks, not already loitering. They'd never expected any craft to approach this fast. 30 seconds. Osric triggered the decoy cascade. Dockside engineers had packed empty coolant canisters with fission flare cores. The drill ejected them aft. Spinning shards bloomed into brilliant hot clouds, spoofing thermal trackers. Dominion targeting algorithms staggered. 15 seconds. The blockade gap, a sliver mapped by Osric's sleepless nights, loomed ahead. The drill's gyros jittered in mild variance. Juno's code corrected them. Mara's knuckles whitened on the helm yoke, though the computer flew the path. 10 seconds. Blue lances of coil gun slugs streaked past, missing by meters, sheared sideways by the spin's weird vector equation. 5 seconds. The drill punched through the gap. Proximity alarms screamed as the belly of Dominion cruiser Unyielding filled their forward view. Armored plates the color of polished oil, studded with missile tubes. "Mag teeth out!" Mara barked. From each tug's nose extended grappler arms, salvage claws retrofitted with neodymium anchors and serrated edges. On impact, they would cling like lampreys. The tugs were still a solid column. Impact would load the first ones devastatingly, but the spin's momentum would force each coupler to shear in sequence, distributing energy. "Contact!" A thunderless quake traveled the column. Osric's harness jerked. Ballyhoo's nose cone crumpled inward but held. Its grapple teeth buried in cruiser's hull plating. Plasma ricocheted as kinetic energy converted to white heat. The drill's rotation forced Ballyhoo to skid sideways, chewing metal like a circular saw. Behind, tug after tug tore free of couplers, each continuing the spiral around the wound they were drilling. Outer hull gave way in molten curls. Internal bulkhead behind ruptured, exposing compartments to vacuum. Dominion Marines in exosuits tumbled outward amid sparks and shards. The drill's later tugs, released from couplers now, slammed through armor seams blown open by the front half, widening the hole into a jagged throat. Osric's headset filled with triumphant curses. "Pressure dropping in enemy decks," Ruerwi shouted somewhere behind. "We're through 20 meters." They needed 30 to breach the reactor shielding. That had never truly been the goal. They only had to cripple the ship, force Dominion to pull back and guard its own wounds, leaving a corridor for freighters. Still, momentum had its own grim romance. Ballyhoo's primary thrusters were stuttering, but spin kept her gouging deeper. A structural rib snapped with a seismic crack, always folded like tinfoil under the drill's teeth. Internal explosives must have fired because suddenly a bloom of flame jetted around them, snuffing out in vacuum. Ballyhoo's hull temperature warnings lit crimson. Mara looked sideways at Osric, sweat drifting from her temples and freezing. "This is where we pull off, Captain." "Agreed." He keyed the detach sequence. Ballyhoo's grapples retracted. Microjets shoved the tug away from the glowing wound. Behind them, the unwieldy train had disintegrated into individual boats, most of which now somersaulted off vector, systems overstretched but alive. Despite the chaos, Spiral still whispered course corrections, guiding each tug clear of debris. Inside the cruiser, fires and explosive decompression would rage for hours. Already Osric saw the vessel listing, thrusters sputtering as auto-stabilizers failed. Another Dominion cruiser broke formation to assist, while two more edged backward, uncertain how many warheads might be hiding inside future lumps of space junk. Osric opened a broadband channel, voice iron calm. "Dominion Fleet, this is Captain Osric Galloway. On behalf of Prosperity civilians, we've just demonstrated how fragile your encirclement is. Stand down and yield a humanitarian corridor, or we continue operations." Silence answered, filled by static and the dying cruiser's alarms. Then, "Prosperity craft, this is Commander Velez of UCH Resolute. Cease hostile actions or face total annihilation." Osric chuckled softly, pressing transmit again. "Commander, you're missing 10 tugs in your sensor logs. They're currently lined up under the shadows of your ammo truss. One stray order from you and my crews push their throttles. How much guts do you think your fleet has left?" It was bluff. Those missing tugs were half disimbibed and nowhere near the ammo truss, but Velez didn't know. Minutes dragged. Finally Velez spoke, clipped. "Prosperity Station is granted temporary humanitarian allowance. 1 corridor, 24 hours, no armed escort." Docking control on Prosperity hooped so loudly the channel squealed. Relief freighters, waiting on the far side of Callisto's shadow, already began burns toward the corridor. Back before Osric slumped, exhaustion settling into every joint. He looked at Mara. Her hair floated in disarray, cheeks streaked with tears of relief. She managed a grin. "Captain, you've still got it." "I'm going back to gardening after this," he muttered. "Can't trust you lot not to wreck the place otherwise." During the next day, 3 bulk freighters slipped through the blockade gap unchallenged, docking at Prosperity with holds bursting with food cartridges, scrubber mesh, and medical nanites. Station residents lined viewports, shouting and waving banners made from bedsheets. Children who had never seen a ship bigger than a tug pressed palms against glass as the colossal freighters slid into berths, their rumbling engines like the first notes of spring. Dominion cruisers maintained a tense perimeter, but kept distance from the wounded yielding, now secured by emergency tethers and towing drones. Inside Prosperity's council chamber, Menendez sent tight-beam transmissions to belt governance authorities, broadcasting evidence of Dominion's attempted starvation blockade and the civilian casualty potential the drill plan had avoided. Political heat grew. Rumors spread of impending sanctions. Osric should have basked in victory, but responsibilities lingered. Tug crews limped back to Dock Ring C, battered and patched with carbon scoring. Casualties were mercifully light. 3 broken arms, a dozen concussions, 1 tug lost to engine breach but its pilot rescued by a wingmate. Dr. Sadiq worked triage with brisk efficiency. Ruer Liai welded new couplers even as his own hands shook. The old captain visited each ship, thanked every pilot personally. He collected their battered badges, small metal tags with serial numbers, and delivered replacements etched with a spiral drill emblem. Not medals, he insisted, just reminders of what people who were too small to matter could accomplish. That evening, the council held an impromptu gathering in the grand concourse. Thousands attended, shoulders brushing in a cavern lit with banners of cobalt and gold. Menendez stepped up to the dais, words prepared, but the crowd's chant drowned him out. Drill, drill, drill. Embarrassed, Osric tried to fade into the wings. Mara seized his elbow and pushed him forward. Under the glow of holoprojectors showing live images of returning freighters, he spoke. I spent years hauling cargo across the belt. I learned engines obey math, but crews obey hope. Dominion thought Prosperity could be cornered because it had no battleships. Turns out, we didn't need battleships, just grit and people who know how to push. Cheers thundered. Someone tossed a garland of hydroponic daisies. Osric caught it, awkward. Across the crowd, he spotted families hugging, tension melting into laughter as children waved plush replicas of tugboats. Someone had already started 3D printing. As celebration sprawled into night, Osric wandered to Dock Ring C one more time. Ballyhoo floated in its berth, bow, scorched but proud. He ran a hand over the rippled metal where it had chewed through a cruiser. Mara joined him, holding 2 cups of steaming coffee recycled from station stock, but tasting like triumph. Council's talking about a defense pact, she said. They want a standing tug militia, fleet doctrine, training regimens. Guess who they want as admiral? Osric snorted. I retire, they draft me. I save them, they promote me. See a pattern? You could say no. Go on, he said, sipping. He watched Jupiter's bronze storm swirl beyond the bay window. But I've got a better idea. I'll teach them everything I know, then step aside. Fresh eyes, younger reflexes. Captain Chen, perhaps. Her eyes widened. Me? You already spun the drill. Wind chimes from a ventilation grill tinkled, carrying the distant echoes of continued celebration. Osric felt, for the first time since Lily's passing, a settling in his chest like ballast, finally balanced. He set the empty cup on Ballyhoo's hull and smiled. Come on, Admiral. In trading, Prosperity's got a future to map and morning shift starts early. They walked along the pier, tugboats bobbing gently behind them, each one bearing scars that glowed dull orange under repair lamps. Scars that meant the station would breathe, eat, and dream another year. Above, unseen by revelers, the Dominion blockade loosened further. Uneasy now that supply lines were no longer hostage, and somewhere in the deep belt, freight captains whispered about a new tactic. Tugs in a spiral cut through arrogance like hot blades. The legend of the retired freight captain and the spinning drill formation grew, carried by carrier wave gossip, leaving every would-be oppressor to glance nervously over their shoulder whenever a tugboat's humble running lights flickered in the dark.